Okay, in this part of the lecture, we are going to explore indigenous instruments and musical materials. North American indigenous musics draw on elements with a long-standing indigenous heritage and elements that are usually associated with settler culture. All of these musics are indigenous. We're going to spend a bit more time, though, on those musics that indigenous communities see as more traditional, partially because they value them and partially because they receive too little attention in most writing on music. Native American musics are not less Native American, though, if they don't sound like the ones that follow. Okay, what about instruments? In indigenous music, voice and percussion instruments are central to many musics in North American indigenous cultures. Monophonic vocals with percussion is a common texture. As far as percussion instruments, there is an immense array of instruments. Common ones include frame drums, which are wide in diameter and have a shallow depth, log drums, which in the past were made with a hollowed log fitted with one or two drum skins. Contemporary powwow drums are made with many different materials. Most of them use animal hide. Another type of drum is the water drum. This is partially filled with water, and they can be made of pottery, logs, or metal cooking pots. Another type of percussion instrument is a rattle, and two types here. The container rattle is a container. It's filled with small hard objects, and these are made from like gourds, wood, bark, hide, bones, horns, or turtle shells. And the choice of material for the rattle often has ceremonial significance. A suspension rattle is objects strung closely together to hit each other. And these are made from hooves, bones, or claws. And these are often part of dance outfits, such as the jingle dress dance. Flutes are important in several regions, such as the Southwest, the Plains, the Northwest Coast, the Northeast, and the North. And there are also fiddle-like instruments in the Southwest as well. But primarily we see voices and percussion. Instruments are often associated with sacred practice and ceremonies. These are used to communicate with spirit beings and may be understood to have spirits themselves. There are protocols to follow from this. Musicians may make offerings to instruments. It might be seen as disrespectful to present certain instruments in schools or not to do so in an appropriate way. And it may not be correct to buy or sell an instrument or hold or display it in a private collection or museum. When engaging with these instruments, it's best to make sure their communities of origin are consulted. Now let's turn to the stylistic elements of the music, the vocal sounds, the rhythm, and the form. Now, if any of these terms are unfamiliar to you, I recommend you go back and look at the music fundamentals sheet that was in Module 1. So songs are often monophonic, even with multiple singers. Remember, the human voice is central. As far as the vocal technique, it involves vocal tension and a pulsating sound and the use of vocables. You can review by listening again to example 12.1. Much of this music is metrically irregular, as in the beat is not grouped into recurring groups of 2, 3, or 4. And this also happens in indigenous adoptions of European music, such as hymns, fiddle music, or country music. Some stylistic elements pertain to a single tribe or a small group. There are recordings of some Anishinaabe and Lakota songs from early 20th century, and the vocal melody and the drum beat move at different speeds. So an asymmetrical repetition is found in areas throughout the continent. As far as musical expertise and participation, in many contexts, songs are not aesthetic objects to be contemplated, but rather are tools with which important work is accomplished for and with one's relations. Okay? Singing sometimes may not seem polished or professional. Like we think of a professional singer in Western art music. It's not going to sound that way. In many Indigenous communities, song is part of almost everyone's experience. And singing is valued when it attests to valued relationships. It's not necessarily when it's virtuosic, but everybody involved. And this is not because North American Indigenous music is quote unquote simple or primitive or at an early stage of development. That last idea was debunked long ago, even though it hangs on in popular culture. Now, all musical practices acknowledge and initiate relationships. These relationships can be between known intimates and across more diffuse publics. These functions are particularly important within Indigenous North American music making. So we're moving now to consider a range of examples in light of this function of music in terms of acknowledging and initiating relationships. Relationships should be considered in an inclusive sense. This means relationships with people, with the land, its inhabitants, with spirits. And in some Indigenous understandings, this includes animals and spirits appearing as people, and people can sometimes take the form of animals. Relationships also can include other than human persons or more than human persons to describe supernatural relatives. Let's look at relationships with what the text calls intimates. These are connections with known or knowable persons, lineages, community members, spirit beings. Guiding spirits provide assistance in areas such as healing or hunting. People receive songs, dances, or even ceremonies from spirits in visions. The connections involve reciprocal requirements of beneficiaries, an obligation to honor spirits and their gifts. Beneficiaries don't speak lightly or even openly about sacred songs, dances, or ceremonies bestowed from other than human persons because there's a risk of harm as a result of disrespect. This can be problematic to share sacred experiences or ceremonies with outsiders. This is also one reason we don't engage extensively with these musics out of respect for them and their purpose. Performances of songs and dances may express a relationship to kin and lineages. Certain Nishka songs, only sung when a member of a specific family dies, this is in the Pacific Northwest. In Nuchanut practice, certain songs belong to individuals or families, and it's problematic for non-family members to sing them. These concepts don't overlap well with intellectual property law and the concept of public domain from the United States and Canada. These songs are subject to Indigenous laws, however, but they may not be recognized by North American governments. In 1967, an opera by Harry Somers, Louis Riel, was created, and a Canadian opera company revived it recently. It has a little bit of controversy to it because one aria, an aria is a movement within the opera, a song, uses vocal material from a traditional Nishka funerary song. The composer, Somers, had taken the melody from a 1933 transcript of the song by folklorist Marius Barbeau and this really distressed the Nisga'a people. After advocacy by several key individuals and groups, the Opera Company and the National Arts Center in Ottawa commissioned a new aria to replace this one. Music connects intimates in other ways. The Katauyak are vocal games traditionally played by Inuit women. Two performers stand face to face, sometimes holding arms and moving together in time, and they create a wide array of vocal sounds. The game ends when one person runs out of breath or laughs. This music connects people in immediate ways. It also articulates broader networks of relationships. Some of the sounds imitate natural sounds, like the honking of geese. In the past, many Cree and Ojibwe communities, these are now in contemporary Manitoba and Ontario, would gather for the summer and split into family groups in the winter. Major ceremonial events happened in the summer, and many large gatherings still happen in the summer today. These reflect consequences of contact and colonialism. We have festivals and Treaty Day ceremonies, for example, and then of course powwows, talent shows, concerts, and mass popular styles. We also see square dancing tournaments and step dancing contests, which have histories that date back to contact with fur traders. These summer events provide ways for community to celebrate themselves. It allows them to reflect the complexities of contemporary life, and many events feature local participants, reinforcing connections to community. Lastly, these events involve intergenerational participation and the prominence of Indigenous languages. The last portion of this part of the lecture is inviting you to listen to the Katauyak song from the listening guide 12.3. There are actually 2 recordings, so you can hear the different vocal sounds they create in this piece. So we've got the first one from Hudson Bay, and then the second one by a solo voice. So I encourage you to follow along with the textbook. Since this is 2 pages, I can't go back and forth. You can hit pause and listen, and then go forward and listen a little bit more, and then listen to the second tune in Blackboard. And that is it for this portion. Thank you, and I'll see you for the last segment of the lecture next.